All right, so welcome everyone. And here we are. I'm going to now share my presentation with you all here. Hope you can see that. So let's just start with the word perinatal and the word trauma. So the word perinatal, of course, peri means around and natal, anything around birth. So that would include in the womb. So anything from conception to the moment of being born and the moment after being born. And in this case, and so anything traumatic, of course, is something that leaves an imprint and that is difficult to process and integrate. Now, the way I'm going to approach this is two ways. I'm going to approach it your own birth trauma, and if you are a woman and you have given birth, any trauma that you may hold also as a birth giver. So I'm going to bring those two things in here. So, all right, so what is perinatal trauma? Well, I kind of just defined it already. So I'm going to just go right into it. And I owe a great thanks. So one of the things that I would say brings me to do this particular presentation is that I have been a facilitator of holotropic breathwork since 1986, actually, and I certified several years ago, but I had started practicing it, as a participant, started facilitating with others. And holotropic breathwork is a technique similar to rebirthing or other breathwork, like techniques that can go into cellular memory, that can access memories and birth or perinatal material around that. So Stan, he's a Czech psychiatrist that immigrated to the United States back in the 70s. Stan is a renowned psychiatrist, very well known with expanded states of consciousness, as well as having done some extraordinary work with people around their birth. He charted and he was able to identify the different stages that we go through from the moment we're conceived until we're born. And this is all through, thousands and thousands of sessions that he's done. He's known for back when it was legal, his LSD psychotherapy sessions. This material presented itself. He worked a lot with people in the back wards of Czech psychiatric hospitals that were chronic psychotics. And he would find that this content was coming up over and over again with many of them. He's also worked with holotropic breathwork and done holotropic breathwork sessions since the 60s, 70s, and has brought that work to us. Actually, no, since the 70s, because it was thanks to LSD becoming illegal that prompted him to then devise holotropic breathwork. It was the mother, of the necessity being the mother of invention, that he was able to no longer do his work. So he had to find some kind of technique that would allow him to go into expanded states of consciousness. And just so you know, what is it? What does this really mean? I just want to identify it now because this is going to show, and I'm going to name some of the experiences I've had in terms of facilitating it, or even my own experiences, how these perinatal matrices show up. In holotropic breathwork, there are basically three keys. One key is that you're in a very safe setting. You're always facilitated by someone else. Even if you try to do it by yourself, you never go as far as when you're facilitated by someone else. It's like you need that place where you can let go to someone. So it's a place where you're lying down, you begin a rapid breath, you're breathing fully, so it's expanded, it's more rapid than usual. And then also it brings in what we call focused body work. And so it holds a place where you can access very deep cellular memory and then have someone to support you in releasing that if it shows up in the body. And then lastly, the last component to it is integration, where we have we draw a mandala at the end, and that can also help integration. So all of these components make holotropic breathwork, while very evocative music and very curated music is going on to support the process. It's a very intelligently thought out process of how we bring in the music. So I just want to identify that and give you that background. If you haven't ever done it, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful modality. I can't recommend it enough. Of course, there's some counterindications for certain people, but if you have any questions about that, there's a lot of information on the net about this. So let me dive in. So thanks to Stan Grof, he was able to identify 4 what he calls BPMs, or birth perinatal matrices, that we go through. And I'm going to take you through them right now. And as I do, I want you to be aware, both, I'm going to identify what goes on for the fetus, and I'm going to identify what goes on for the mother. And I just want you to let yourself take a journey. You also, if you have any, we always like to recommend you have a journal on these calls. So if you do have a journal, please write down anything that I am naming that might activate something in your own story. Because this, sometimes when you finish the call, you're like, what did she say? Because it could tap into something so deep and so unconscious that in your conscious mind, you might have completely forgotten it. So it's a great way to catch it, and also a great way to identify, oh, this might need more looking at that I hadn't even realized. So the first BPM, oceanic bliss, union, fusion. So that moment of being conceived, you are one in this blissful oceanic world of the amniotic waters. You are one with the mother. You're moving along all through your fetal development, where you have this incredible relationship with the mother. You will never live as intimately with another human being the rest of your life as you do when you are living inside the womb. Every fluctuation in her hormones, you feel. Every single thing she eats or ingests, you get. Every emotion she feels, you feel. Every movement she makes, every blow, every trauma she feels, you will also feel. So that's why I wrote right here, the good womb or the challenging womb. The good womb is where you are wanted, where you are loved, where you are held in those amniotic waters, where she is supported on the outside by her partner, by her family, by her community, where she's ingesting good things, where she is just so happy to be pregnant and so desirous and not having a tough pregnancy. A challenging womb could be where it's an unwanted pregnancy. She's having a hard time. She may have some very deep, problematic stories in her own childhood and have great ambivalence about becoming a mother. It could be where, and I tend to attract this, and I don't know, I can't scientifically, I can't say that this is the like often a case, but what I have noticed is that I've attracted a lot of people that have had their fathers die when they've been pregnant, not their mothers so much, their fathers. And so they have that blow of extreme grief, and then the child is born, of course, the child is bathing in those waters of extreme grief. And another thing that I have attracted or seen in my practice over the years is where there's been an attempted abortion. So the mother tried, in whatever version, taking a pill, different methods, trying to abort, and the baby was so tenacious, would not leave, and she could not. And so I've accompanied quite a few people with that process of accessing those memories and realizing, oh, that's where my low self-worth comes from, or always feeling like I'm not wanted, and never really having that full understanding until the aha of accessing that moment of like, oh my God, my mother's trying to get rid of me right now. And I'm sure if you're on this call, you're already familiar that we can access memories all the way through, from our conception all the way through. Our cellular memory is so rich, so potent, and so competent. It's extraordinary. And it can be pre-verbal, which is also very interesting when we do access those memories. So these are some examples of what can happen in that first BPM. So then all of a sudden, so that's basically from zero, from conception moment until your first contraction of the mother, until the first contraction of the mother. BPM 2 is where all of a sudden the contractions begin, and there's this kind of, what's going on? And what I always say is, imagine you are in some kind of contraption where your head is engaged in most cases. I mean, some babies are born breech, some are, they're different combinations of if you're not cesarean, but the majority of babies are engaged. And at that moment, all of a sudden there's a contraction. So there's something that comes around the baby's head. And imagine as adults, if we had the same force that would come around us, we would be just in itself very traumatized. And we were powerless over that. That would be quite something. So we can have what's called extended BPM2. That's where you're basically stuck, where the cervix is taking a long time to open. And that can be both traumatic for the child and for the mother. So the child can be like, what is going on? Of course, non-verbally. What is happening? I'm stuck. I can't get out. Am I going to die? What is this? It could be the very first sense of threat since the fetus was in existence. For the mother, it can be very painful. You know, there are plenty of stories in everyone's generation of mothers dying in childbirth or coming close to dying. It is a very frightening thing. And so am I going to be stuck here forever? If a mother had such attachment and such wishes for a beautiful natural birth and all of a sudden realizes, does this mean that I'm going to have to abandon my birth plan? What does this mean? So this time can be very frightening and also attract later in life a certain feeling of always being stuck, of reacting later in life to that trauma, of being thwarted, of being hesitant and giving up, wanting to just give up, of just being depressed, of feeling, why bother? All right. So that's the second BPM. The third one is where the contractions are full on. So in the first one, in the stage just before in BPM 2, the contractions are probably 20 minutes apart, more or less, and maybe even longer, depending on how stuck the cervix is in terms of opening. At the BPM 3, so here you have this cervix, which of course is this band of muscle in between the vagina and the uterus, needs to open at 10 centimeters to allow the baby's head to go through. Now imagine that it's slowly, each contraction, of course, is the means in which this cervix is opening. And of course, we all know that with period cramps, a period cramp is that it's where the cervix is opening just enough to allow the blood through. So a lot of times we may not even be fully aware of our own anatomy. Like what are these things? What are these pains? What are the mechanics of what's really going on? So in BPM 3, the contractions are full on and they can get up to 5 seconds apart. And at that point, the cervix is, if it's a fluid vaginal birth, it's really those last moments of really getting that cervix nice and open so that the baby's head can get through easily enough. Now, the problem is that the blood pressure goes up, the heart rate goes up, there's great fear. What happens if it's extended? And a lot of times what I've seen, particularly in the painting, I created a particular art therapy modality called creative response therapy. And in it, I've been doing it for like 35 years. In it, I've seen so many birth perinatal material come up. And one of the things I have seen, and I've learned now because I start reading the language of the nonverbal messages, which is when there's big problems in the trauma zone of BPM 3, it's when there's fire. It's this feeling of everything's on heat. The house is on fire. I'm on fire. It's so hot in here. It's all the blood's rising, the heart rate's rising. It's panic. It's that feeling of, am I going to live or am I going to die? And that's why we call this birth perinatal matrix the struggle for life and death. It's intense. It's strong. This is the moment when mothers that die in childhood die. It's too much for them in whatever way. And then, if we're here to tell the tale, we have gone through BPM 4, and we actually have the experience of dying to the first home we've ever known. And this is very deep. And as I'm speaking, this may activate you emotionally, because it is very emotional. We're dying to the last time we were that close to our mother in that way, that very primal symbiotic relationship, because pretty soon the umbilical cord will be cut. It's that place where we die and we're born into something brand new. We're born into the light. We're born into another world where all of a sudden there's gravity, where there are loud sounds, where there are bright lights. And and what happens in that? What is the transition? It's the only time until we really die where we're going, unless we have a near-death experience, where we're going to fully die to an experience and come out into a completely different world. And who's there? Is anyone there? Is our mother anesthetized? Is the nurse or the doula or the doctor, is there, or the fire, person, is there some kind of presence? Is there accompaniment? Is there a welcome or not? And is there great panic? Is everyone trying to save the mother? Are they trying to save the baby? If you've been a mother to this, were there drugs brought in that were contrary to your birth plan that had to be brought in? Did you feel like you failed, like you had to ask for an epidural when you didn't want one initially? Did you feel like you missed it because you had to go under with general anesthetic? So there can be a lot of trauma at this stage of regrets, of grief, of what didn't get to happen. The other thing that can happen here is that there can be a lot of medical interventions. The baby can be taken away from the mother. There can be separation due to just Western medical practices, due to crises. There can also be the whole story of cesarean. And I just want to name what goes on with cesarean, back up a little bit. So you have two cesareans. You have elective cesarean and you have emergency cesarean. Elective cesarean is where you stop at BPM 2. Elective says, okay, I already am at high risk health-wise, I need a cesarean. Or the doctor says, I'm going away on holiday then. I'm sorry, I won't be able to deliver you. I want you, so please deliver me when it's convenient for you. So it will be that kind of thing. Now, emergency cesarean can happen anytime pretty much in the majority of cases, it's in BPM 3. And there's that feeling of unfinishedness, like I'm not finished. I didn't finish the birth for the baby's sake. And the mother can also feel that, like, I didn't get to see it all the way through. She can also feel a sense of failure there and grief. All right. So these are the initial matrices that really pave a way. And we've never had anyone else in psychology articulate this so beautifully. So he is a real gift to us in his work. So I just want to also name here, I want to name one more thing here in terms of the BPM 4. Another thing with BPM 4, and I'm going to share this with you, a very amazing story, is so I teach this creative response therapy, and I was leading a workshop once, and a woman had this image of a woman's two legs parted apart, like bent, the knees bent, and there was this big red, like tuft, but it was like orange. It wasn't red. It wasn't blood. And at the end, I was just, she had a hard time sharing with us all in the group. And I said, this is unusual. I said, I can see, sometimes I see, like yellow for the light that's seen on the other side. Sometimes I'll see red for blood, but I've never seen orange. And then she just cried. And then she said, because I have red hair, I was so scared that my child would have red hair as well. And I held back and I kept holding back the final push. And the doctor kept saying, the baby is here, push. And I just was so scared the baby was going to go through the same teasing and bullying and trauma that I went through. So I just held back pushing. And she goes, that's still a memory that I have that I had to negotiate that. And I had this whole trauma with the doctors like telling me push, and I didn't want to because I wanted to be reassured that this baby wasn't going to go through what I did. So it can be, how is that baby going to be received on the other end? And that can be part of the trauma. We see it in cultures where there's such an attachment that the baby be a boy. Sometimes it could be an attachment that the parents have had so many boys that they really want a daughter. And it's like, oh, you're another boy, the fifth boy. We really wanted a girl. So it can be that feeling of the first eyes, that knowing I'm not welcomed. It can be, the sounds, the voices, the energy. Oh, she got your father's nose. Lovely. It can be these imprints that come in. So how are we welcomed? Is the mother going through, well, we're going to see it in the next one, deep postpartum depression? is she really traumatized with just content that she's holding for her own story, that she's unable to bond with the baby. All right, so that's all part of BPM-4. Now, the good news, sorry, I just want to say that BPM-4, it's not all doom and gloom, but we are dealing with trauma here. So I just want to say that the good news of it is being received. We have, the beautiful work that's been done that has supported much more beautiful, easeful water births or low lighting, music, all the wonderful things, the massage, skin to skin contact immediately. So it doesn't have to be all traumatic. And I just want to name that, even though we are talking about trauma, and we're going to talk about how do you move that trauma through. So I won't leave you here. So I just want to name a bit more here. Perinatal trauma, and I know Summer can add some good, content to this as well. So please, Summer, after I share here, I would love to hear anything you want to add to this. You're so experienced, as I well know. So these are some of the key things that the mother can go through. So as I mentioned before, was it a desired pregnancy? Was she supported in the pregnancy, both medically and, affectionately, and, love and, her love connections? Did she have a previous miscarriage or a previous abortion? Is there a loss or grief that has not been fully mourned that may be present? And so a certain guilt, a certain fear, as in the case of miscarriage of, if she's had several miscarriages or even one, just, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to tell anybody. I don't want this to happen again. If there's abortion, the fear of shame or going through the actual shame, fear of religious retribution. And then other is sexual abuse history. So that can show up in all kinds of ways. I've seen it myself with someone that I was really close to, who was, because she was sexually abused, she was very frightened and very scared of being naked in the hospital setting and being looked at because of the extreme trauma she had from her sexual abuse history. And so to be exposed was very, very traumatic for her. So she did her best to have a woman doctor and a woman doula and, have everyone there, but still it was just that deep fear of even that was very difficult for her. And then sexual abuse history can be in all other kinds of ways, just that territory being, that cellular memory being woken up again because that area becomes so alive. Was there morning sickness and just being miserable and feeling guilty for being miserable and just wishing she weren't pregnant because she's just feeling miserable all the time? Was there an unexpected crisis I talked about, like the death or, being left suddenly in the middle of pregnancy? Was there a like having to flee, like a refugee situation or a natural disaster? And then, like I said before, was your birth plan able to be followed or not? And then the grief of it not being followed. Summer, anything you want to add to this before I go on?
Definitely. I mean, so much, Cyntha. You've covered so much. I think the thing that's been really present for me while you're talking are memories of some strong motifs in my own family and the places they're reflected in some of these frameworks. And I got quite big emotions coming up about my son Draco's birth, which was like, it was a beautiful birth. There was no intervention, no tearing. It was at home. When you said, how did you come out? It's like he was received in this dark, beautiful, like dim Krishna Das playing kind of room, straight into the midwife, straight onto me. And I was overwhelmed by the emotion of the journey the family had to take to get there. And so my birth, my mother birthing me, was horrific, like horrific intervention. She was stuck where like her cervix wouldn't open enough. Like the whole story in the family was, you were so big you almost killed your mother. But a root of that is in her birth, where my grandmother was the nuns, and it was like, you don't make noise, you don't scream, you don't do anything, and she's surrounded by the nuns, and she wasn't Catholic, so it was this other layer of colonial fear. And so as my mother was crowning, my grandmother kept sitting on her and pushing her back up. And so it was just like tracing that. And then this other piece that landed was my brother's gestation. And that was during the Gulf War. And my mother bled placenta previa, extreme, like waking up at 8 years old and seeing blood all over the floor, and my dad had passed out. But then seeing how he was an emergency C-section. And there are challenges for him to finish things. And it's been this real, like, I guess what I was flooded with is looking deeply at how we are so interconnected to the family stories and the places where we don't always celebrate the successes because it's an intergenerational process to get to the success. And so I was so moved by the honor of being able to birth a child in that way. And it was just like it was for them as well. And so that's what was really present for me. And I'm sure there's tons of anecdotal stories, and I just am sharing mine because they're reflections of what I see in practice in a million different ways. But it doesn't belong just to us, I think, is what
Yes.
I want to say.
Thank you very much. And there's another piece that I want to name that I didn't write the words, but premature birth. So in premature birth, there's always going to be some kind of trauma, whether that's the child being taken from the mother and put into an incubator, and even that, I want to name that. So on another call, I've shared with you all that I do have that story in my own family. My brother was born when my mother was only 5.5 months pregnant. And now there are beautiful methods where they take the premature baby and the mother and father exchange kind of womb duties, and they put the baby on the chest of the parent. And even it could be a grandparent as well, which is really beautiful, or a sibling, and if it's an older sibling, obviously. And they put a sheepskin over, and then they put down a little tube of oxygen so that the baby's still getting plenty of oxygen. So they don't put the tube in the baby, they just tuck it in the sheepskin. And they have that warmth, the warmth of the parents, or whoever, the caretaker's body, matched with the sheepskin around it. And systematically, it was an Austrian or a pediatrician that pioneered this. And I saw a beautiful documentary on her. And I don't have her name right now. It's been quite a long time since I saw it. But she, at that time, it was a 30% higher weight gain in the babies, in the premature babies that had that method versus the ones that were just put in an incubator. And so, we've come a long way, but of course that practice is not everywhere, as we well know, and that we've got a long way to go. So there's the whole story with premature birth as well. And definitely, and then of course, the trauma of how we birth. And we all know that lying down isn't always the way one really should. I mean, that was not the way that was done for years. And you could say more about that, Summer. I know.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think there's a few Ayurveda therapists on here who've had the, privilege of studying directly with Rosita and learning the stories of Miss Hortense and other scenarios, and just the deep study of biomechanics that's coming out now, and how so much of this is about everything that happened to that pelvis leading up to that moment. And any damage to the sacrum, age is a big part of this too. Like people under 25, there's still mobility. Later, there's fusion and calcification. And so it's interesting to me being around Indigenous groups that are still practicing their life ways. There's a big emphasis on you've got to protect that pelvis from childhood. And so in our modern settings where either the division between what we consider male and female is not discussed as much for many reasons, whether they're feminism, whether it's gender inclusivity, whatever the rationale is, whether it's shame in very more patriarchal cultures, there is a hiding of female anatomy and therefore a lack of understanding of it. And so it's everything that happens to that body up until that moment, and then everything after. And what I see so often in practice are women in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Organs are falling out, prolapse is major because the care wasn't there, because of this shame and the institutionalized shame. And hysterectomies are a big part of this too. This is an area this will come up across the board, is when you're tending someone who's had a hysterectomy. If they've birthed, inevitably there's stories there. And so again, it's like, if I distill it, it's so much more than just the mother and the child. This goes out and forward and back to the whole of a lifetime. So it's a massive conversation.
Thank you, Summer. And when we get to this next part, I'm going to have you come in and whatever you'd like to share on the healing of that. I'm going to, that'll be helpful. Okay, thank you, Summer. Very good. Okay, we're hitting on some things here that are very important. So I just want to let everybody know. So what my plan is to just finish this presentation here, and then I want to lead you all in a brief visualization, just to allow some integration of the material. And then we're going to have a sharing. So I'm going to come here now. So the restorative healing that can happen. And so of course, and yeah, it includes body work as well. I don't know how I did I put that down below? No, I didn't. Anyway, it's down below. So one of the healings, and of course, our Vigo, this is an our Vigo call. So I did these slides in a jet lag state, so excuse me. But so one definitely is the breathwork modalities that I mentioned before. The other is that as this material is coming up in whatever form it is, sometimes it's just holding space and letting a woman tell her story. You know, it's something so beautiful that I love is that when a woman has given birth, how when you go visit the baby or you go see her afterwards, there's always that time where she gets to tell her story. And I've seen this, I think, you know, because I'm a counselor, because I'm in this world, I'm attentive to when she wants to tell her story and the audience just isn't right. They're just not receptive. But when a woman who has given birth has a receptive audience, particularly often it's informal with another woman who's also given birth and understands. But in whatever way, just to hold space and let her tell her story. It's so important. Music therapy is also brilliant. And just, it can open up all kinds of different spaces to access different emotions. And then the one that I'm very specialized in is the expressive arts, the art therapy modalities. And I say particularly using spontaneous painting with the left hand and spontaneous clay with the eyes blindfolded. These two ways of using art are the most profound and effective to getting direct into the cellular memory of what happened in any birth perinatal or perinatal trauma in general. It's extraordinary. So when you paint with the left hand, you're accessing, of course, the right side of the brain, and you're accessing the unconscious and the non-rational mind, the intuitive knowing self. And you're also, and I also recommend painting with the hand itself. That's why it's not just the brush, the literal hand, because you're activating also a cellular memory and that knowing. And then the clay, to work with clay and to let things come out. And when you're blindfolded, again, you're in that liminal space, you're in a pure intuitive space. There is no attachment to aesthetics. And then of course, using music with this. So these are things. And then of course we have, I mean, that's why we're even here, is the Arvigo methods of beautiful, beautiful body work and somatic work. Yeah. And then I just want to say here before I lead us, just some of the premises of healing. That is, these are the givens here. The cellular memory captures and retains everything that is impressionable from any age, including at conception. So I have lots of anecdotes. One of the most stellar that I've ever had was I led a holotropic breathwork workshop. And there was a woman that wanted lots and lots of covers over her. And she was just like in this state. And then at one point she came out and what somebody checked in on her, like, are you okay? And she like snapped, like, leave me alone. And she kept saying, you know, it's too loud in here. It's too loud in here. And it wasn't too loud than usual. It was just like, okay, she's in process. And then she came out and she did a drawing. And at the time I was still married, leading these. And my former husband is an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. And the drawing she did was a cochlea. And he just flipped and he said, you have done the most precise anatomical drawing of a cochlea I've ever seen as a free drawing. And he went to his library in the other room and he pulled out one of his anatomy books and he held it up exactly to hers. And she had done an exact drawing of the cochlea. And so then she called me up about a month later and she said, what does this mean? Like, okay, fine. But why did I even do this? I don't understand. And I said, actually, no, I take that back. It was a year later. She said, I still haven't made sense of this. And she goes, I want to sign up for your next workshop, but I feel like I've unfinished business because I still don't even know what I accessed in the first one. And so I said, is your mother alive? Yes, she is. And so then she called her mother and said, what happened? And I ran into, actually, because I was having this call with her, and I ran into the other room and I asked my former husband, what age does the cochlea form? It was just this intuitive thing all of a sudden that just popped in. I said, what age of gestation does the cochlea form? He says at 2 months of gestation of pregnancy. I said, okay. So I went to her and I said, I went back to the phone. Back then it was before mobiles. And I said, can you ask your mother what happened at 2 months pregnancy? And she said, okay. So she went. Now, this woman was from a third world country, and a developing country. And she called me right back and she said, you will not believe this. She said, my mother had what she thought was a hernia. She had told the doctor she was pregnant. They didn't believe her. She had a hernia. They operated on her. And when they operated, they realized that she was pregnant. And so in that moment, they had opened my mother up. There was a flood of light and a flood of sound. And it was a barrage. It was just this assault to my system. And it was just too much. And so that was, I already was, convinced of all of this, but that story just took me forever over. So, all right, so that's cellular memory. And then next, until we're ready to access this material directly, we will project it onto our environment and relationships. We will project this content onto our environments and relationship, because it's just, especially because it's so pre-verbal, it's so non-verbal, and it's inevitable. And then the inner healer will allow us to access this material when we're ready. And that can happen through a whole variety of means. So before I lead the visualization, Summer, anything you want to add in terms of just the restorative healing or the premises of healing?
I just wanted to say I was there when this happened, so I was having this flood of memory too. Like it was so radical, everybody. Like honestly, it was for me a formative moment that the body actually tells time through marking what's happening to it. And that has influenced my whole practice ever since then. And so that's amazing. And to answer your question, there's so many things. So obviously in our Vigo, there's the uterine and belly work and sacral work and hip work. There's yoga, and that happens at different times. There's food, there's herbs, there's the faha, which like binds the body together. There's so many ways to come to this within and outside of this practice. But I think if we were to really name it, I think the biggest healing for so many people that birth is changing our perception of time and dropping into what we call the feminine and the seasonality. Because to really heal, there's stages, and then there's a surrender, and it's almost the same as a pregnancy or a birth. There's stages of healing, and there's patience, and there's loss, and there's many deaths in that process. And so it's like, as a person that tends and supports people, one of the biggest things I've had to learn is to hold them where they are and to keep validating people, like, this is where your pelvis is right now. This is where your ligaments are right now. This is where your psyche is right now. And you can't rush that. And every little bit of messaging that's coming from pop culture is, how quickly did you get your body back? And so that's antithetical. And I think, in our process of unpacking our culture, we're unpacking where that time is robbed from people. And one other thing I want to name, I'm coming across more and more just in people's sharings and their stories, is that we're now living in a time where people birth. And so, of course, women are the majority of people that birth, but there are people who have different bodies that birth and different identities that birth. And in that scenario, as long as there's a uterus and a way for that baby to be released into the world, there are whole new stories that will come with that, whole new traumas that will come with that, social traumas. There's just a lot. And it's like, that's not my lived experience, but I'm humbled to, this is a human being giving birth, however they present. And so just as therapists, it's to feel all of it exists now.
Summer, thank you so much for saying that. You reminded me of my very last holotropic breathworks workshop I did hold. There was a young woman in the group, breathing, and she was a test tube baby. She was an embryo that was frozen for about, I think, 3 years. And when she did holotropic breathwork, the whole time she was freezing. And she just kept saying, give me more blankets. I can't get warm enough. I cannot get warm enough. And then, okay. We kept doing it. And then when she came out, she just had this big aha, like, oh my God, I get it. So that was quite something.
Incredible.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me that. Yeah, there's a lot there on that. Definitely. And all that will be there, all that cellular memory. Yeah. Okay, everyone. So if everyone just close your eyes, I'm just going to lead you in a brief visualization. I'm just going to put on a little bit of music So I just want you to just sit in a place where you're symmetrically aligned in whatever way that would be. And just allowing yourselves to just come into a very deep place. And just taking 3 very deep breaths. Extending each breath, inhaling, exhaling, breathing in, breathing out. And first, I just want to take you again through some key things that we have shared here today, to just see if there's anything that wants to be healed, that wants to be further investigated, further integrated. How it was, how you feel intuitively the pregnancy was with your own mother. If we have anyone on the call that was adopted at birth, just trusting your felt sense. Breathing long and deep as I give these different prompts. Just allow the exhale to take you through the different places I'm evoking. The anecdotes that you have heard of, the awareness of where your mother was in life at the time she was pregnant with you, the relationship she did have with your birth father at that time, if you do know, and again, the felt sense if you don't know. And then how you were born. Was it natural? Was there a lot of drama and panic and fear? Was it a smooth birth? Were you a first birth? Had that womb been inhabited by another before you? Was your mother encouraged and able to trust herself? Or was she at the mercy of a system that was not in alignment with her deepest wisdom? And how was the actual moment of being born? And how were you received? How were you after being born? How was the care? Were you looked after? Was there breastfeeding or not? Was there separation or not? Were you welcomed in by others? And then, as anyone on this call who has ever been pregnant, in whatever way, just going through your different pregnancies, whether that includes an abortion, miscarriage, or an actual birth, just reminding yourself of the different realities your womb has lived. And just checking in if there's any unfinished business there, any unhealed material there, any ungrieved material. And then with everything that's been evoked on this call and anything I've evoked just now, what healing is most calling to you that wants to happen? You don't have to know how it's going to happen, how it would happen. You don't have to know where or with whom, but just evoking that intention, naming that intention, offering up yourself for the most synchronistic meetings, being met by whatever means that would bring you that healing, knowing that that is coming your way by the very fact that you're naming it, recognizing it, and offering yourself up. No need to worry how it would happen, but recognizing there's something there still. I'm just going to leave you for a few moments to breathe long and deep and integrate what has been shared here right now. And when you're ready, I would like you to, only when you're ready, take your time. When you're ready, I would like you to come out and slowly write down anything in your journal that you would like to. I'm just going to put on a little music. Just to let you just write down anything when you're ready. And then we'll open it up for a share. Just taking a deep breath. Taking your time, listening to what you most need here. I'm going to give you all another minute. Are there any key words that are still needing to be written? Just letting yourself jot those down with these last moments. And in a moment, we're going to open it to the sharing. And if you are watching this recording, we thank you for viewing, and we're going to stop the recording to honor confidentiality. So thank you.